This is TWiT.
So if you look at democracy overall, democracy is really struggling worldwide. And there was an Atlantic piece that really went into detail about kind of the tools that authoritarians are using around the world to kind of, subvert democracy and slowly take it over. And a real commonality with those tools is they all involve the tech industry to some degree, whether it's, manufacturing consent or propaganda or mass surveillance or, all these different tricks. And I wanted to ask you guys, do you think that I have long been of the opinion that we should have, to get to Cory's, we should have done this 20 years ago theme here, but we should have had discussions about how the things we were built were going to affect the society around us 20 years ago. And I kind of think what's going on in Ukraine right now is really an ultimate example of how the lack of foresight in the tech industry is fundamentally putting democracy at risk.
It's pretty human. I mean, back in 1920, when we were still using electric cars, we might have considered the consequence of changing to fossil fuels. But
are you willing to give up? That's my question. Because Leo, you're describing, we could have stuck with electric cars, and they had very short ranges, and electricity was expensive or more expensive back then. And also that power has to come from somewhere, and we would have burned quite coal to generate more power for it. So would that have helped? And also the internal combustion engine is an incredibly useful bit of technology that we've gotten a lot of benefits from. Costs, yes. And so when Brianna raises her very, very fair point, and I think was well said, my fear is that if we begin to be more cautious, there's a risk of becoming overly cautious. And I know that I'm taking the capitalist side of this, so I'll take the stick for that. But one, I don't think we can look far enough to really see. Two, I don't think society will slow down enough in a capitalistic democracy setup, which is the only way that I can kind of think to run things. And three, I think you wouldn't be able to kind of figure things out. So no.
It's very easy to do so in hindsight. I mean, Cory did a great, cause and effect chain over the past 20 years, but that's all in hindsight. There's no Harry Seldon out there yet who can say, well, I see where this is going. And even if there were, the political will to forego the benefits of of fossil fuels or whatever, certainly is lacking. We don't have the political will to do hardly anything.
Yeah.
We know the world is about to be engulfed in flames. The latest IPCC report is dire. There'll be no action.
And people are saying we should frack more.
Yeah.
As a solution to the Russian crisis.
There'll be literally no response, no rational response to that. This is why I tried to end the last segment with something positive, like the return of Western liberalism and the greening of America. But I guess you guys really want to go down that rabbit hole of despair.
I think Brianna raises a really excellent point, and I think that the only way to tackle it is to break it up into different sub questions, because should we have thought harder about what we were doing with tech? Obviously, the answer is yes. But which parts and what role does tech play in the disintegration of democracy is something that I think you can't just use the unitary phenomenon of tech to analyze that. You have to actually break down different functions. So
let's say social media. Let's say Facebook. Is that
but even with social
granular?
media.
It's not.
So I would say that there are three questions about Facebook and other forms of social media. So the first one is, what does targeting do? The second one is, what about group formation? And the third one is, what about persuasion? And persuasion is the one that I think we lean on the most and is the least credible, the least plausible. So the tech giants go out there and they say, we have invented a mind control ray to sell your nephew fidget spinners. If you pay the premium that we charge for surveillance advertising, we promise that we can change people's minds and bypass their critical faculties. And then there's a certain kind of tech critic who goes, yeah, that mind control ray that they invented to sell your nephew a fidget spinner, guess what? Robert Mercer stole it and made your uncle a QAnon. And I don't think that there's much evidence for it. I think we see Facebook doing things like they did this experiment where they exposed 60 million people to a stimulus they predicted would increase voter turnout. They got 300,000 people to vote, which sounds very impressive, more than they thought would. And it sounds very impressive until you realize that it's a 0.39% effect size, and elections are not decided by 0.39% margins. But even though that's not a very convincing piece of evidence that Facebook can alter our conduct, it is, in fact, very compelling evidence that Facebook is run by the kind of donkey that performs non-consensual psychological experiments on 60 million people, and they shouldn't be running a goddamn lemonade stand. So I'm not all that worried about the persuasion part, which leaves this other question, which is, if it's not persuasion, if it's not that we're bypassing people's critical faculties, how is it that anti-democratic and other odious ideas spread? And I think that that is the function of targeting, that you can find people who are, because of their material conditions, predisposed to believe conspiratorial accounts of the world. And so I don't think that that's like that they're like genetic fools. I think that it's like, if you've lived in a region that has been heavily destabilized, you've experienced serious losses, you're traumatized, you don't trust the institutions that were supposed to protect you because they failed you, then you are in fact disposed to hear explanations for what's going on that don't include a necessity that you believe that those institutions are well run when you know for a fact that they aren't. And so I think targeting is a thing that you get with advertising. And I think that it is a way that all of this stuff has been very salient in our politics. And then the final piece is group formation, which is kind of like targeting. We are now at this moment where if you have a minority or fringe view, you can find other people who hold that minority or fringe view. And in many ways, that's amazing, right? We live now in a moment in which things that were illegal in living memory, it's now considered a shame and a stain on our moral character that we ever thought that they were wrong, right? Like homosexuality or smoking pot or, a whole long list of things that we've had a complete reversal of our views. And the way that we got there was not by people who held heterodox views standing up and demanding to be counted. It was by people being able to speak their truth quietly to other people who they thought would listen, and forming groups quietly in private so that they could then stand up and speak their truth together. And, if you're a kid who's never heard the word trans, but there's something different about you, you can type some search terms into your favorite search engine and you can find the words for who you are. Right? And you can acquire the vocabulary and the community to describe it, and you can go out and do it. Now, the same thing is true if you believe that Jews secretly run the world. You can also find the words for that and join those people, right? And so that has also been incredibly salient to our political fortunes, but in a different way, and in a way that I think is more of a mixed bag. And so I would say, like, in terms of like the marry, keep, kill of these three things, I would kill targeting. I would basically just make fun of persuasion, and I would really lean into understanding and refining group formation and trying to figure out ways to put your thumb on the scales for forming groups that are socially beneficial.
I honestly feel like persuasion is just another way of saying targeting, and it's equally ineffective. I'll grant you on the group formation. What about algorithm, though? You leave that out.
That's persuasion.
Is that part of persuasion?
That's like we spied on you for 2 years. We built a profile using all this junk science that doesn't reproduce, like
so that's the
big
tool
5 personality types or whatever.
Uses. Yeah.
And then we just feed fidget spinner into it, and it pops out the message that makes you want to buy a fidget spinner. We feed white nationalism into it.
That's algorithm in the context of advertising. What about algorithm in the context of, what algorithm is really designed to do is increase engagement. Later on, we'll advertise to you, but we just want to be sticky. But the consequence of unfettered algorithm, unattended algorithm, both on YouTube and Facebook, seems to be extremism, seems to be persuasion in the form of moving you towards extremism. I guess
there's something to that, but I don't know how you distinguish that from, like, I'm really interested in carpentry, so I watch a carpentry video, and then I discover that the kind of carpentry I'm interested in is in joinery, so I watch one of the suggested joinery videos.
And pretty soon you're building bonfires.
Well, pretty soon you're like looking at Japanese nailless joinery, and then there's one kind of joint, and then you've joined an esoteric community of people who just care about this one joint. Like, I don't see how that's very different from any of the other so-called radicalization.
That's fairly benign, though. I mean,
but it's the same thing, right? It's doing is it's directing you down an esoteric pathway from a very broad category to the narrower one that you're more interested in. And I don't know that it's persuading you so much as exposing you.
Okay, fair enough.
I just flat out don't agree with that. But go ahead, Alex, please.
No, Brianna, please.
No. I was just going to say, I think that generally speaking, not talking about you specifically, Cory, but I think there's a kind of idealism that has really permeated the tech industry, where we kind of tell ourselves that these things that we build are neutral and that it's not having long-term consequences, and kind of wash our hands of it. And I really did used to believe that. And I've really come to believe that we've been information idealists when we need to be information realists the whole time. And I feel like what is going on right now is a really solid example of that. You talk about like perhaps regulating or tweaking the edges around the algorithm. I don't know what institution is supposed to bring those changes to the forefront. I think the core thing that's kind of rotten here, if you really want to get down to centrality, is the culture of the tech industry, where we don't have a sense of morality or ownership over the things that we build. I do think the engineers, we don't have ethics that we think about the same way that a lawyer or a doctor might tend to think about that. It's good in many ways. You can go out, you can build an app, you can ship it, you don't have to worry about it with licensing. That opens many doors. I think the dark flip side that we've really kind of just said we don't want to think about or hold ourselves accountable with is that there's the things that we have built are increasingly really destabilizing the world. It's certainly destabilizing the democracy here in the United States. And I wish we had thought about this much more.
It's clear Twitter's a lot more fun without the Russian troll bots.
Yeah.
I think we're mostly in agreement there. I'm all for thinking through ethical precepts when it comes to your technological choices. What I'm specifically saying, though, is if you, like me, think that the tech giants are corrosive, pathological liars, that it would be pretty weird to assume that the only time they're telling the truth is when they claim that their products work really well. And given how thin the evidence is for those products working well, right? For Persuasion working well. P&G dropped its $100 million Google ad spend and saw a 0% change in their sales.
Wow.
So if that's the case, right? If it's just a con, which I think it is, and I think one of the ways in which the tech giants are corrosive is that they're con artists, then it is not doing the tech industry's job for them to discount the power of algorithmic persuasion. It in fact is striking at the heart of their business, because all of their money comes from the faith-based belief among advertisers that they can do algorithmic persuasion.
Well, I think it's time to do a little ad before we go. Okay, go ahead, and then I'll do some algorithmic persuasion coming up.
I just want to say I don't agree with you, Cory, and this is why. One of the big projects we did at Rebellion PAC over the last year is we went out, we got the voter list, and we did a project where we wanted to get people to go vote, people that had not voted before in a primary, people that only registered to vote for Donald Trump. And we went out and we specifically targeted them. We found out really excellent information on what motivated them to get to the polls. We showed them pictures of schools in their neighborhood, and we really precisely and algorithmically tailored what they saw about the issues and served them ads that were just really, really dialed down and created to appeal to them. I then ran those ads to them with a control group and an experiment group. And then I went and saw who actually ended up going and voting in the actual election. And while I don't know specifically who they voted for, I have actual data I can show you this that shows repeating those ads to people over and over objectively made them far more likely to go out and vote. So I just don't agree with your summation of the data and the studies there.